I used to believe that good mothers knew when to let go, that loving your child meant trusting them to choose their own happiness. I used to tell myself that I would never be the kind of woman who meddled, who drew lines where love wanted to cross. But I was wrong, terribly, painfully wrong. Because when love turns into a promise you can't accept, motherhood stops being gentle and starts being war. My name is Margaret Ellis, and this is the story of how I nearly lost my son, to guilt, to pity, to a love that wasn't meant to survive. It began like most love stories do, quietly. My son, Ethan, was 25 when he met her. Lydia Carter, her name was. She worked at a tech firm downtown, and they met at some company event through mutual friends. I remember the first night he mentioned her. He was sitting at the kitchen island, sipping coffee far too late in the evening, scrolling through his phone with that soft, distracted smile that mothers recognize instantly. The smile that says, "Someone has my attention." "Mom," he said, "there's this girl. She's different." Different. The word every mother both dreads and hopes for. He showed me her picture. Long dark hair, brown eyes that seemed too large for her face, a smile that looked like she was trying to hold back laughter. She was pretty, no doubt, but not the sort of girl I had pictured for my son. I had imagined someone more grounded, perhaps. Someone who didn't seem so fragile, so dreamlike. Still I smiled. "She's lovely, Ethan." He grinned. "Yeah, she really is." From that night, Lydia became a part of his sentences, his weekends, his future plans. I'd wake up on Saturdays to find him dressed and rushing out the door, mumbling something about brunch or art shows. I'd hear her name in every casual remark, every laugh that came from his room during late-night calls. It wasn't long before he brought her home. When she arrived, I realized she was even smaller than she looked in pictures. Soft-spoken, polite, nervous. She brought flowers for me and complimented my cooking, though I could tell she barely touched her food. She was trying too hard to make an impression, and I could tell she was the kind of girl who had been told, "Be perfect or don't be seen." But Ethan adored her. That much was clear. For the next 2 years, Lydia became a steady fixture in our lives. She came for holidays, helped me set the table, sat beside Ethan during family dinners. She'd ask questions about his childhood, laugh at my stories, and sometimes when she thought I wasn't looking, she'd glance at him with a kind of quiet worship that made me ache a little. I wanted to like her more than I did. She wasn't a bad person. She was kind, responsible, and deeply in love with my son. But there was something in her that made me uneasy, something fragile, dependent. Ethan was ambitious, bold, restless. Lydia was careful, anxious, rooted in small dreams. I worried that someday one of them would outgrow the other. When Ethan told me he planned to marry her, my heart did 2 things at once. It swelled and it cracked. "Mom," he said one quiet evening, "I've been thinking. Lydia and we want to get married. Not soon, but eventually." "Eventually," I repeated, forcing a smile. "That's a big step, honey." "I know. But she's the one." The one. I'd waited all my life to hear those words from him, but when they came, they didn't sound like a beginning. They sounded like a verdict. Still I didn't argue. I nodded and congratulated him like a good mother should. But later that night I couldn't sleep. I lay awake thinking about how love can trap a person, how promises can become prisons if made too early. The accident happened in spring. Lydia had planned to travel to Seattle for a friend's wedding. Ethan offered to pay for her flight. He even transferred the money to her account the night before. But she insisted she'd go by road. "It's more fun," she told him. "Besides, I can save the money for the bridesmaid dress." Ethan tried to talk her out of it, but Lydia was stubborn in quiet ways. I still remember the morning she left. She texted Ethan a photo from the bus station. Smiling, holding a paper cup of coffee, hair tied up in a messy bun. "See you soon, love," she wrote. By evening we got the call. Highway collision. 2 vehicles. Several injured. 1 in critical condition. When Ethan dropped the phone, I knew something inside him had already shattered. He drove to the hospital that night, and I went with him. The moment I saw Lydia in that bed, pale, bloodless, her legs bandaged in a way that didn't look human. I felt the world tilt. The doctor's words came like stones falling into a deep well. Severe trauma to both lower limbs, spinal complications. Amputation might be necessary. I turned to Ethan. He wasn't crying. He was just staring, frozen. His silence scared me more than any scream could have. The next weeks blurred into hospital corridors, insurance papers, and the hum of machines that never stopped. Ethan barely left her side. He slept in chairs, skipped meals, forgot work. When the doctors finally confirmed both legs would be amputated, I saw something die in his eyes. He didn't say it aloud, but I knew the guilt was eating him alive. He blamed himself for the road trip, for not insisting harder, for every "be safe" he hadn't said. He told me one night, "Mom, I'm going to take care of her. Whatever it takes." I wanted to ask for how long, but I couldn't. The pain in his voice was too raw. After the surgery, Lydia changed. Her brightness dimmed. She smiled less, spoke less, and when she did, it was mostly about Ethan. How she didn't deserve him, how he shouldn't waste his youth on her. Her parents clung to him like he was her lifeline. They thanked him for every bill he paid, every night he stayed at the hospital. And then, one evening, her father said the words that started everything. "Ethan, you're a good man. You know what's right. You'll stand by her, won't you? You'll marry her like you promised." That night, Ethan told me what they'd said. I remember the air leaving my lungs. "Marry her?" Yes. "After all this?" He nodded. "She's lost everything, Mom. She needs me." And I, in my weakest moments, said what I truly felt. "No, Ethan. She doesn't need a husband. She needs help, and you can give her that without sacrificing your life." He looked at me like I was a stranger. From then on, our home became a battlefield. Lydia's parents visited often, their voices soft but firm, their eyes pleading. "Your son must marry our crippled daughter," her mother said one afternoon, tears glistening as she held Lydia's photo. "It's the only thing keeping her alive." I wanted to scream that their daughter wasn't dead, that she could still build a life, find purpose, heal. But all they saw was what she'd lost, and all I saw was what my son stood to lose. Ethan stopped confiding in me. He spent every weekend at the Carters. He paid for their home modifications, her therapy, even hired a private nurse. Everyone called him noble. I called it self-destruction. Because every time I looked at him, I saw a man burying his future under the weight of pity. If love is the purest thing in the world, then pity is its cruel twin. It looks the same, feels the same, and destroys you just as deeply. That's what I learned in the months that followed Lydia's accident. Ethan became a ghost of himself. Not gone, but unreachable. He moved through the house quietly, always in motion yet never truly present. His phone was full of hospital reminders, therapy schedules, prescription notes. His once light-hearted laugh had turned into something restrained, hollow. Even when he smiled, his eyes stayed empty. And me. I became the villain in my own home. Started small. Little moments that shouldn't have hurt as much as they did. Like the day I tried to remind him to eat. He was standing in the kitchen, scrolling through his phone, looking for a medical invoice. I made his favorite. Roasted chicken, rosemary potatoes, the kind of meal that used to make him hum softly while chewing. When I told him it was ready, he didn't even look up. "I'm not hungry, Mom. I'll eat later," I said softly. "You've been saying that for a week." He sighed, rubbed his temples. "I can't think about food right now. Lydia's pain levels spiked again last night. They had to sedate her." Something snapped inside me. "Ethan, you're falling apart." "I'm fine," he said, voice sharp. "No, you're not. You're drowning in this guilt, this." He cut me off. "She lost her legs, Mom. The least I can do is be there. But being there doesn't mean destroying yourself." His eyes flashed with something I hadn't seen before. Resentment. "You wouldn't understand." And that was the first time he walked away from me. I stood there, hands trembling, realizing that grief had two victims, the one who suffered it and the one who watched helplessly from the outside. Lydia's parents, the Carters, began visiting often. Too often. They were polite enough, always with that sorrowful politeness that comes from people who think tragedy gives them ownership of your conscience. They thanked Ethan endlessly. They praised his devotion. They told anyone who would listen how he was an angel, a hero, a man of honor. But every compliment carried a hook. One afternoon they invited me for tea. Lydia was home by then, in a wheelchair, pale but smiling. She greeted me kindly, but I could see it, the shadow behind her smile, the way her fingers twisted nervously in her lap. Mrs. Carter poured tea and said softly, "We're so grateful for Ethan. Truly, Margaret. He's been more than a son to us." I nodded politely. "He cares deeply for Lydia." Mr. Carter leaned forward. "We know. And that's why. We hope you'll support what's right." "What's right?" I asked, though I already knew what was coming. He didn't hesitate. "He promised her marriage before the accident. She clings to that promise now. Gives her hope. If he walks away, Margaret, I don't think she'll survive it." My throat tightened. "Are you suggesting my son should marry her out of guilt?" Mrs. Carter's eyes watered. "Not guilt. Love. Love that stands firm even when life changes." I took a slow breath. "And if that love has changed?" She shook her head. "Then he must learn to love again. She deserves that chance." I wanted to be compassionate. I really did. But the words felt like chains. So I said quietly, "Your daughter deserves healing, not a husband who feels obligated." The air froze. Lydia's father's jaw tightened. "He made her a promise. And a man's word means something, Mrs. Ellis." I looked at them both, their grief, their desperation, and realized they weren't asking. They were demanding. That night, I found Ethan sitting on the back porch, staring into the dark yard. "She told me she dreams of walking again," he said softly, not looking at me. "And then she wakes up and can't even turn on her side." My heart broke for him, for both of them, but I had to ask the question I'd been afraid to voice. "Do you still love her, Ethan?" He hesitated. That hesitation told me everything. "I care about her," he said finally. "But love, I don't know anymore. It's different now." "Different how?" "She depends on me. Every minute. Every breath. I can't even go a day without thinking, what if she needs something, what if she falls, what if she feels abandoned?" I swallowed hard. "That's not love, Ethan. That's fear." He frowned. "Maybe love is fear. Maybe love is staying when you want to run." "No," I said softly. "Love is staying because you want to, not because you have to." He stared at me then, eyes wet, voice breaking. "You don't understand, Mom. If I walk away, she'll never forgive me. And neither will I." I wanted to tell him that forgiveness isn't something you earn by sacrificing your life. It's something you build by being honest. But I stayed silent. Because when guilt wears the mask of love, reason sounds cruel. Over the following months, Lydia's recovery plateaued. She learned to use her wheelchair with grace, but the emotional wounds ran deeper. Some days she refused visitors. Other days she'd call Ethan constantly, crying for hours. He spent more time at their house than at ours. I'd wake up to an empty kitchen, come home to an untouched dinner. When I tried to talk to him, he'd smile weakly and say, "She needs me." Once, I found a ring box in his desk drawer. My heart stopped. I confronted him that evening. "Ethan, what is this?" He didn't flinch. "I'm going to propose to her." "Why? Because you want to? Or because her parents are pressuring you?" He met my eyes. "Because she deserves to feel chosen." "Chosen?" I whispered. "You think pity looks like choice?" He turned away. "You'll never understand." Maybe he was right. Maybe mothers never truly understand the choices their children make for love, or what they call love. That night I cried for the first time in years. I wasn't crying for Lydia or even for Ethan. I cried for myself. For the mother I used to be. The one who believed she could protect her child from everything except his own heart. Then came the dinner that changed everything. The Carters invited us over to talk. I had a bad feeling from the start. Lydia was there, dressed nicely, makeup carefully done, trying to look whole. Ethan held her hand the entire time. After the meal, Mr. Carter cleared his throat and said, "We've decided to make the engagement official. Lydia and Ethan will be married in spring." My fork fell onto my plate. "Excuse me." Ethan didn't speak. He just looked down. Mrs. Carter smiled through tears. "It's been such a hard year. This will bring healing to all of us." I turned to my son. "Is this true?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I can't let her down, Mom." Something inside me snapped. The mother in me, the protector, the voice that had stayed quiet too long. "Let her down," I said, voice trembling. "Ethan, you're talking about marrying a woman out of pity. That's not love, that's punishment, for both of you." Mrs. Carter gasped. "Margaret." "No," I said sharply. "You've used my son's guilt long enough. He's paid the bills, stayed by her side, done everything any decent man would do. But marriage, that's not kindness. That's cruelty dressed up as honor." The room fell silent. Ethan's voice broke through it, low and furious. "Enough, Mom." "No," I whispered, standing. "Enough pretending that destroying your future will heal hers." Lydia began to cry, quietly at first, then uncontrollably. Ethan reached for her, and in that moment I realized I'd lost him. Not to love, not to another woman, but to the prison of his own decency. I left before anyone could stop me. For days, Ethan didn't come home. I told myself he needed space. That I'd said too much. That I'd been cruel. But then the phone rang one evening. It was Mrs. Carter. "Margaret," she said coldly. "Your son hasn't been home for days. He's staying here helping Lydia. If you have any decency left, stop interfering." I hung up before I said something I couldn't take back. For the next few weeks, I barely saw him. Until one morning he showed up at the house. Exhausted, unshaven, hollow-eyed. He sat at the table, head in his hands. "I can't do it," he whispered. "Do what?" I asked. "Marry her. Pretend I'm in love when I'm not." I reached across the table and took his hand. "Then don't." He looked up at me, tears in his eyes. "She'll hate me. Her parents will hate me. They already hate me," I said softly. "So let them." He laughed bitterly. "You always get the last word, don't you?" "Not always," I said. "But I'll fight for you when you can't fight for yourself." And for the first time in months he let me. There are moments in life when doing the right thing feels like a sin. When Ethan told Lydia he couldn't marry her, the silence that followed was worse than any shouting could have been. He said she didn't cry. She just looked at him with those tired, hollow eyes and said, "I knew this day would come." He came home that night pale, shaking, and barely able to speak. I made tea, sat him down, and waited for him to find the words. "She said she understood," he finally whispered. "But her father, he didn't." I didn't need to ask. I could already feel the storm coming. The first call came the next morning. "Mrs. Ellis." The voice on the other end was cold, deliberate. "Mr. Carter, I just want you to know what your son has done to my family." Took a breath. He told Lydia the truth. That was the kindest thing he could do. "The kindest thing," he barked. He humiliated her. After all she's suffered. After everything he promised her. "I'm sorry your daughter's in pain, but my son." "Your son," he interrupted sharply, "is a coward. A selfish, heartless boy who used my daughter until she became inconvenient." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tight. "That's not fair, and you know it." "Oh, it's fair," he spat. "Because now, everyone will know what kind of man Ethan Ellis really is." He hung up before I could reply. By evening the rumors had started. In a town like ours, gossip travels faster than truth. By the end of that week, Lydia's story had spread. Twisted, dramatized, mourned. People whispered in grocery aisles, texted in group chats, posted vague, heartbroken statuses online. Poor girl, they said. He left her after she lost her legs. Can you imagine? She would have been his wife if not for the accident. He was supposed to marry her. Some men just can't handle responsibility. And of course my name came up too. His mother never liked the girl. She probably talked him out of it. Cold woman. Doesn't know what love means. I tried to ignore it. I tried to remind myself that people will always choose the version of a story that makes them feel righteous. But when I saw the pain in Ethan's face every time he opened his phone, I started to wonder if we'd made a terrible mistake. He stopped going out altogether. He resigned from his job temporarily, claiming he needed mental rest. He barely slept. "Mom," he said one night, "I keep seeing her face when I close my eyes. What if I ruined her life?" I touched his hand gently. "You didn't ruin her life, Ethan. You just refused to sacrifice yours." He looked at me like I was speaking another language. "She doesn't see it that way. And neither does anyone else." A week later, Lydia's parents filed a complaint. Not legal but public. They posted an open letter online, long and emotional, accusing Ethan of abandoning their daughter after promising her a future. They didn't name him directly, but it was obvious. The comments section was vicious. People called him names I can't bring myself to repeat. Some even said he should be forced to make it right. Forced. As if love were a punishment. I wanted to reach out to tell Lydia's parents that enough was enough, that destroying my son's name wouldn't bring their daughter peace. But every attempt at diplomacy turned into a moral standoff. They didn't want understanding. They wanted atonement. And to them, marriage was the only currency of forgiveness. The worst day came 2 weeks later when Lydia showed up at our doorstep. Ethan opened the door, and for a moment he froze. Not because he wasn't expecting her, but because she looked like a ghost of herself. Thin, pale, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. She wheeled herself into the living room quietly. I stayed back, hidden in the kitchen, listening. "Ethan," she said softly, "you didn't even give me a chance to fight for us." He knelt beside her. "Lydia, you deserve someone who sees you, not someone who feels sorry." Her voice broke. "And what if I don't want someone else? What if I just want you?" He didn't answer. "I lost everything," she whispered. "And the only thing that made sense was you. The thought of you kept me alive." "Lydia." He took a breath, his voice shaking. "If love means breaking myself to keep you standing, then maybe we were never meant to last." I stepped into the room then, unable to stay silent. "Lydia," I said gently, "you're strong enough to rebuild your life without chaining yourself to someone else's guilt." She turned toward me slowly. Her expression wasn't angry, it was worse. It was empty. "You've hated me since the beginning." "I never hated you," I said softly. "I just wanted my son to be free." Her eyes filled with tears. "Freedom doesn't keep you warm at night." She wheeled herself out without another word. The sound of the front door closing was like a final heartbeat. After that day, the Carters escalated. They began visiting Ethan's workplace, calling his friends, even contacting his boss. Everywhere he went, their shadow followed. When I confronted them, Mr. Carter's words chilled me. "You can call it what you want, Margaret," he said, standing tall on my porch. "But my daughter was promised a future. And if your son won't give it to her, we'll make sure he never has one either." I looked him dead in the eyes. "You've already taken enough from him. You won't take the rest. Then convince him to do the right thing," he said. "Because I won't stop." For weeks it felt like living under siege. We received hate mail, anonymous notes, one even threatening to expose Ethan further. Friends drifted away, afraid to be caught in the middle. Ethan grew quieter each day, carrying a guilt that no apology could wash away. Sometimes I caught him staring at his phone, scrolling through photos of Lydia, the old ones when she still walked, when they were still laughing. "I wish it had been me," he said once, his voice raw. Don't say that, I whispered, tears filling my eyes. He looked up at me. She lost everything, Mom. So did you, I said softly. You just can't see it yet. Months passed. The world moved on, but not for us. Ethan went back to work slowly, keeping his head down. The Carters' fury faded when their threats lost power. People stopped talking eventually. New gossip always replaces old. But the damage lingered in quieter ways. Sometimes I'd wake at night and hear him pacing. Other times he'd stand by the window, staring into nothing. The guilt had become part of him, like a scar that refused to fade. One evening, he sat beside me on the porch, the same porch where he used to tell me about Lydia with that hopeful smile years ago. I saw her today, he said quietly. Where? At the rehab center. She's teaching art therapy classes now. I smiled faintly. That's good. She looked happy. Or trying to be. He fell silent for a long time before whispering, Do you think I did the right thing? I turned to him. I think you did the brave thing. He nodded slowly, tears welling up. It doesn't feel brave. It never does, Ethan, I said softly. Doing what's right almost never does. That summer, life started to resemble normal again, or something close to it. Ethan began dating casually, though he never spoke much about it. Lydia moved to another city with her parents. The space between us and them became not just physical but emotional, a silent truce built on exhaustion. I thought I'd feel triumphant, but instead I just felt older. Because motherhood isn't about winning. It's about surviving the parts of love that tear you apart. One night, as we cleaned up after dinner, Ethan looked at me and said, You were right. About what? He smiled sadly. About pity not being love. I think I knew it all along. I just didn't want to admit it. I reached up and touched his cheek. You were trying to be a good man. He nodded. And you were trying to be a good mother. I smiled faintly. We both did what we had to do. He took a deep breath, looked out the window at the night sky, and said something I'll never forget. She forgave me, you know. My heart skipped. How do you know? She sent me a message. Said she finally understood that love isn't about being owed. It's about being grateful for what once was. I swallowed hard. And what did you say? He smiled. Thank you. And just like that, something in our lives finally closed. Not like a door slamming shut, but like a wound slowly sealing itself after years of ache. The following week, I found a letter in my mailbox. No name, no return address. Just a single envelope with careful handwriting. Inside was a note that read, He's free now. Thank you for fighting for him when he couldn't. I'll see. I stood on the porch, the breeze brushing my hair, and for the first time in a long time I cried. Not out of anger or fear but relief. Because even though I had been painted as the villain, I knew in my heart that sometimes love means standing between your child and a life they don't owe anyone, even if the world calls it cruel. Some wounds don't bleed. They linger quietly, showing up in the way a person breathes, the way they hesitate before smiling, the way they brace themselves before happiness, as if joy might hurt. That was Ethan for a long time. And maybe, in a smaller way, it was me too. A year had passed since the storm. The gossip had dried up, the anger had burned out, and silence had replaced the noise. The world has a short memory for other people's pain. Ethan had found work at a new firm across town. He moved into a small apartment, not far from home but far enough to start over. He stopped flinching when Lydia's name came up, though her shadow never quite left his eyes. I visited him often, not because he needed me, but because I wasn't sure who I was when he didn't. He'd cook sometimes, not very well but enough to make me proud. There was peace in those small things, in the way he'd talk about mundane office gossip, or how he'd laugh again without apologizing for it. Still, some nights he'd go quiet. I could tell he was remembering. Once I asked him, Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd married her? He looked up from his plate, thoughtful. All the time, he said. And every time I realize I wouldn't have been helping her. I'd have been hiding from my guilt. He paused, a faint smile flickering across his face. You were right, Mom. You always said pity feels holy, but it rots you from the inside. I reached for his hand and squeezed it gently. You learned it the hard way, son. Yeah, he said softly. But at least I learned. That summer I got a postcard from Seattle. It was from Lydia. The handwriting was neat but firmer than I remembered. No tremor, no hesitation. The card showed a painting of a shoreline at sunset. On the back she wrote, Dear Mrs. Ellis, I hope this doesn't feel intrusive. I just wanted you to know that I'm okay. Life looks different now, but I'm learning to live in it instead of around it. I teach art therapy full-time. The students call me Miss Oedi. Sometimes I even forget what I've lost. Tell Ethan I wish him peace. Truly. Thank you for protecting him even when it made you the enemy. With respect, Lydia Carter. I must have read that note 100 times. Each word carried forgiveness, and behind it, freedom. That night I showed it to Ethan. He smiled faintly, running his thumb over her handwriting. She always had a good heart. She still does, I said. He folded the postcard gently and placed it in a drawer. Then maybe we both got a second chance. I wish I could say that everything healed perfectly after that. That guilt left, that time filled every empty space. But that's not how life works. Some nights, I'd still dream of that hospital room. Lydia pale and broken, Ethan hollow-eyed. Me standing between them like a wall built out of love and fear. I'd wake up in the dark and wonder, did I save my son, or did I simply protect myself from losing him to a life I couldn't bear to watch? There's no clear answer. Maybe both are true. But motherhood isn't about being right. It's about surviving the doubt afterward. 2 years later, Ethan met someone new. A woman named Grace Turner, a nurse at the same rehab center where Lydia had once been treated. The irony wasn't lost on me. Grace was nothing like Lydia. She was strong-willed, grounded, with a quiet humor that disarmed people. When Ethan introduced her, I expected to feel guarded, but instead I found relief. Grace didn't treat Ethan like a savior. She treated him like a man. At dinner one evening, she said something that stayed with me. Everyone thinks love is about fixing people. It's not. It's about standing beside them while they fix themselves. Ethan smiled at her the way he used to smile before the world got complicated. And for the first time in a long time, I saw hope without the weight of guilt. One autumn afternoon, we were out on the porch. Me, Ethan, and Grace. Sipping coffee as golden leaves fell across the lawn. Grace went inside to take a call, leaving me and my son alone. He turned to me suddenly. You know, I hated you for a while. He nodded. I know. I thought you were cruel. I was, I said quietly. But I had to be. He smiled, not out of amusement but understanding. You weren't cruel, Mom. You were right. I just couldn't see it through the fog. I looked at him, proud and sad all at once. You forgave me. He reached over and squeezed my hand. You saved me. For a long while we just sat there. No words, no tears. Just the kind of silence that feels like healing. Months later I got an invitation. A small cream-colored envelope with elegant handwriting. Ethan and Grace. Invite you to share in our joy. I cried when I read it. Not because my son was getting married, but because he was doing it for the right reasons this time. Not out of guilt, not out of pity, but love that had survived fire and found peace. At the wedding, Grace walked down the aisle in a simple white dress, her smile calm and genuine. Ethan's eyes glowed the way they hadn't in years. As I watched him slip the ring onto her finger, I thought of Lydia, of the life she had once dreamed of, and the one she had built instead. I silently thanked her for letting him go, for forgiving what the world never understood. When the ceremony ended, Ethan hugged me tightly. I wouldn't be here without you, he whispered. I smiled through tears. You would have gotten here anyway. Maybe a little later, maybe a little bruised. But you would have made it. He shook his head. No. You were my compass when I'd lost all sense of direction. And for once, I didn't argue. Years later, Long after the wedding, long after Grace and Ethan had moved to another state, I received another letter. It was from Lydia again. Dear Mrs. Ellis, I saw the photos online. You raised a good man. Don't ever doubt what you did. Some of us survive because someone else had the courage to be hated for a while. I'm happy now. I've started a foundation for accident survivors, helping them find purpose after loss. I call it New Roots. Tell Ethan I'll always be grateful. Warm regards, Lydia. I read that letter aloud to the empty kitchen, my voice trembling. Then I placed it beside the old postcard and smiled through quiet tears. Sometimes late at night, I sit on the same porch where this story began. The stars above are the same ones that once watched me worry myself sick, pray in silence, and question everything I believed about right and wrong. The world outside is calm now. My heart too, mostly. People still say I was cold, that I stood in the way of love. Maybe they're right, maybe not. But what they'll never understand is that I didn't stand in the way of love. I stood in the way of guilt pretending to be love. And if I had to do it all again, I would. Because motherhood isn't about giving your child everything they want. It's about saving them from the things they don't need but can't see will destroy them. That's what no one tells you about being a parent. Sometimes love doesn't sound like yes. Sometimes it sounds like no whispered through tears. And sometimes that no is what saves a life. They say time heals everything. I've lived long enough to know that's a lie. Time doesn't heal. It teaches you how to carry pain more quietly. It teaches you how to live beside it, like a scar that no longer throbs but still remembers. It's been nearly 15 years since that awful accident. The world has changed. The house has grown quieter. The faces around the dinner table are new. Smaller, louder, full of life that reminds me how quickly things come full circle. Ethan and Grace have 2 children now, Liam and Ellie. They call me Nana Margaret, a title that still catches in my throat every time. When they run through my kitchen, leaving crumbs and laughter behind, I sometimes wonder what Lydia would think of all this. Would she be proud of him? Would she be happy for me? Think she would. Ethan calls every Sunday. It's our ritual. He'll talk about work, the kids, how Grace is trying to start her own clinic. He always ends with, "Mom, you doing okay?" And every time I answer, "I'm more than okay." But after the call ends, I sit by the window and stare at the same maple tree that stood outside for 40 years. Its branches are older now, its trunk thicker, but it's still there, still reaching upward. I've come to see life like that tree. It bends in the storm, loses things it never gets back, but keeps growing anyway. 3 years ago, Lydia came to visit. It was unannounced, just a knock on my front door on a rainy afternoon. I opened it and there she was, sitting in her chair, smiling like she hadn't aged a day since I last saw her. "Hello, Mrs. Ellis," she said softly. For a moment I couldn't speak. My chest filled with 100 emotions at once. Surprise, guilt, gratitude, fear. Then I smiled. "Lydia." She wheeled herself inside. The sound of rain on the porch filled the silence between us as we sat across from each other. 2 women who had once fought on opposite sides of love. "I was in town for a conference," she said. "I thought I'd stop by." I poured her tea. My hands shook as I set the cup down. "You look well." "I am," she said with a gentle smile. "I never thought I'd say that years ago, but I really am." We talked for hours, about her foundation, about the young people she mentored, about how she'd learned to drive with hand controls and how freeing it felt. Then she asked the question I'd always dreaded. "Do you ever regret it, Mrs. Ellis? The way things ended?" I stared into my cup for a long time. The steam blurred my reflection. "Every day," I said honestly. "But regret doesn't mean I'd change it. It just means I wish there'd been a kinder way to do the right thing." She nodded slowly. "I used to hate you," she admitted. "I know. I don't anymore. Understand now. You weren't protecting yourself. You were protecting him. I can respect that." My throat tightened. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled again, eyes warm and distant. We were all just broken people trying to do the right thing in the wrong moment. When she left that evening, I stood by the window and watched her car pull away. Rain streaked the glass, and for the first time I didn't feel the old ache. Just peace. That was the last time I saw her in person. Last winter, a letter came from her assistant. Lydia had passed away after a brief illness. She'd left behind a will. Nothing extravagant, just a few personal requests. One of them was addressed to me. Inside a small envelope was a note written in her hand. Please tell Ethan that forgiveness isn't a gift he owes me. It's a bridge we both walked across. And tell you, Mrs. Ellis, that you were braver than I realized. I hope you've forgiven yourself too. I sat at the kitchen table for hours, crying quietly, tracing her words with trembling fingers. Grief isn't always sharp. Sometimes it's soft and familiar, like an old song you once loved but can't bear to play again. That night I called Ethan. She's gone, I told him. He went silent for a long while. Then he said, I knew she wasn't well. She called a few months ago just to talk. I think she wanted to say goodbye. She left a note, I said. She wanted you to know you were forgiven. He exhaled slowly. I think we both forgave each other a long time ago. We didn't say much else that night. But something in his voice sounded lighter, as if a chapter had finally closed. These days my world is small but full. I tend to my garden, volunteer at the church's outreach program, and babysit my grandkids when Grace's clinic gets busy. Liam loves to build things. Tiny houses from blocks and twigs, towers that lean and fall but never discourage him. Ellie paints everything. Walls, boxes, even my garden pots. Every color she uses reminds me of Lydia's hands, stained with the same wild ambition for beauty. Sometimes, when Ethan comes to pick them up, he'll linger on the porch before leaving. We'll sit side by side just like we used to. Do you ever think about her? He asked me once. Every time the sun sets, I said softly. Because no matter how bad the day was, she always made it end with color. He nodded, smiling faintly. I named Ellie after her, you know. Her middle name's Lydia. I blinked back tears. That's beautiful. She deserved to be remembered, he said simply. And in that moment, I realized something I'd never allowed myself to before. He wasn't haunted by Lydia anymore. He carried her, yes, but gently. Not as a wound, but as part of the story that made him who he was. Last week, I found an old photo album buried in the attic. Inside was a picture of Ethan and Lydia at a summer fair, the year before the accident. They were laughing, wind in their hair, sunlight in their faces. For years, I couldn't look at that photo without guilt. But now, I framed it and placed it on the mantel beside Ethan's wedding portrait. Felt right. Because both women, Lydia and Grace, shaped the man my son became. One through heartbreak, the other through healing. And maybe both kinds of love were necessary. Some nights, when the house is still, I sit outside with a cup of tea and think about everything that's happened. The choices, the mistakes, the mercy hidden inside the pain. I used to believe strength was about holding on. Now I know it's also about letting go. Of fear, of guilt, of the stories we tell ourselves to make sense of loss. People still whisper sometimes. She's the one who stopped her son from marrying that girl. They don't know the whole story. They never will. But that's okay. Because what matters isn't what they think of me. It's what my son became because of it. He's a good man. A gentle man. The kind who listens when others speak. The kind who understands suffering without drowning in it. And if I had to choose between being loved or being right back then, I'd still choose the same path. Because love, real love, isn't always soft. Sometimes it's hard and ugly and misunderstood, but it saves the people it touches in ways the world will never see. The last page of Lydia's letter had one more line. I didn't notice it the first time because my tears had blurred the ink. It read, "Your son kept his promise, Mrs. Ellis. He said he'd take care of me. And he did, just not the way either of us expected." I think about that often. Because in the end, he did keep his promise. He cared for her through compassion, through memory, through the kind of respect that outlives romance. And maybe that's what growing up really means. Understanding that love doesn't always mean forever. sometimes it just means enough. So this is where my story ends. An old woman sitting beneath the same maple tree that's seen all her seasons: youth, fear, motherhood, loss, and grace. I watch the sunlight flicker through the branches and realize how strange and beautiful it is that pain and peace can coexist. Lydia is gone. Ethan is happy. I am content. The world kept spinning, and somehow so did we. And though time never healed everything, it taught me one final truth. The price of a promise isn't always heartbreak. It's the courage to face it, to learn from it, and to forgive yourself when the world refuses to. Subscribe for the next story.